Okay, let's see.
Barry, what's your shirt say? CYG? What does it say?
Yeah, call your girlfriend. I thought I
Oh,
would
dope.
rep them. Amina and Anne's book came out. They had a podcast where it was them talking to each other from DC and LA. And they just wrote a book about like how they had the podcast, but the friendship kind of went down, like while they were doing it, and how they went to relationship therapy for their friendship. And that's what the book is supposed to be about. Their book is called Big Friendship. So I thought I'd wear their shirt
I
today.
love it. Love the pivots.
So I was like, it's kind of surprising in bringing this in. Like, they're doing a book that's coming from being friends talking on the podcast, which is, of course, another layer or something somebody might want to do with a podcast. And it's not on the podcast, but it's on the friendship that started the podcast. So I
Exactly.
feel like, you would understand being the person you are, like,
Yeah,
taking a spin off of something else and, using it for another medium. So that's been
absolutely.
pretty cool to see on this. So I'll start. Okay, I always, okay, so it's Benoni. I'm saying your name correctly. Yes.
Yeah, Benoni.
Benoni, sorry. Um, Tago.
Tago.
Tago. I was
Yeah.
like, okay, let me not like be too creative with it. Okay, so I met you in person at Podcast Movement 2016, I believe. That's when we like met, and I was like, I remember you talking to me, and I was like, this person follows me. Like, I asked a fool on the internet. Why this person that seems to actually be working is, telling me they follow me. But that was cool to like meet you and really like look into what you do and the things that you do. So I'm gonna read your bio for anyone that might have missed that or didn't see it, just to bring everybody together on who we're talking to today. And this is the one you sent over. Just if I get anything wrong, this is what you sent. launching, launching his career as an assistant to the Jonas Brothers, Benoni quickly became a part of the band's day-to-day management team, and through that experience, developed a keen sense of entrepreneurship. Since then, Benoni has produced content for both TV and new media on platforms that have collectively garnered 20 million views. In his current dual role, he is the head of business development for Issa Rae Productions, the misadventures of Awkward Black Girl and HBO's Insecure, and the president of Raedio. Am I saying that correct? I don't know if I'm.
Yeah, radio.
Yeah, okay. Issa Rae's music initiative, which is the audio. Additionally, you've been profiled by Modern Man and Black Enterprise magazine for your work in management and your consulting company, the Bizz Plan, which has worked with various media brands, including the Uninterrupted LeBron James sports platform, beauty entrepreneur Peakmill, and financial expert Tonya Rapley. I feel like
That's me in a nutshell.
you in a nutshell. And then we have you now working, because you don't have it on there, is the Apple Music show for radio for Issa Rae. And then
Yeah.
Looking for LaToya, the podcast that came with Insecure, the additional podcast.
Correct. Yeah. So we did the Issa Rae radio show with Apple Music, and that was basically for Insecure. We were able to feature a lot of dope guests. We had Joe on an episode. We had Missy Elliott on an episode. We had Pink Sweats on another episode. So we're currently working on doing more episodes of that with Apple. And then Looking for LaToya, we have a couple of ideas around that. So we're just talking to HBO about just next steps with it. But something around that should be announced pretty soon.
Okay. So I'm just going to jump around here, but since we're on HBO, I want to talk about we have of course Issa Rae has a show in HBO. How did you all decide to include audio in it? Because there is Insecurity that of course is done by LSN and HBO. What made you all think there's probably even more we could do with this and discussing it further?
Yeah, I think it was a mix of a lot of things. Like, one, I always think about things from an audio perspective. I always think about how can we make this an audio thing. That's just my day to day. With Looking for LaToya, we recognized early on that it was a hit, and that was something that people talked about. as a show within Insecure. And, with COVID and everything, we weren't able to go out and shoot anything because productions were shut down. And so we thought the next best step was basically to, sorry, let me turn off my phone. We thought that the next best step would be to just create an audio version of it. So if you listen to Looking for LaToya, there's pieces of it that we put in the show that were actually from things that we filmed. We just stripped the audio and put it in. And then we created a whole new script so that it could become an extended version of what you saw on TV, essentially. So it was really just us, pivoting and trying to figure out more ways to create content given the resources that we had.
And I want to say this conversation is happening because he texted me. I tweeted, of course, if you follow me, you probably know I'm on Twitter, feedback on Looking for LaToya. Like, it just feels like this came afterwards and things like other just comments about it. And he'll hit me up to just talk about that part of it, which I appreciated. And it really, like how you just explained it, like that all came together. That made me just wonder, like, when it came about and when it was thought of, like, to do it and that sort of thing.
Yeah, it was definitely afterwards. You also called us out about not putting a link to one of the promo tweets that we did. So duly noted. We'll let our social media manager know that they should put a link.
It's always going to be my thing. Like podcast promos without a link, I'm never going to understand it. I won't. So.
Right. Yeah, no, we definitely had a misstep on there, and we'll do better. But the good news is it probably could have extended, but for the first week, it was the #1 podcast in TV and film. So imagine if we had put more links, we'd probably still be #1. But, we're working on it. We're learning. It's a work in progress.
Okay. I mean, just letting you know, you can always bring in somebody, to consult if you're thinking about how you would take a project further. There are people
if we could afford you.
that. Oh, please. So in doing it, like, and just kind of going back to the start, I was listening, and when I send a video of this on Monday, I'll send the links to the different podcasts you're on. Is this giving feedback? Do you hear like a clip or anything? Okay.
I don't hear anything.
Okay. But I was listening to Behind the Brilliance with Lisa Nicole Bell. And one of the things you were mentioning is before you started working for the Jonas Brothers, that you were working another job and somebody hit you up saying, you could do this. And you were like, well, I mean, I guess I'm going to go quit and I'm going to go do this. And you were figuring out how you were going to travel at the last minute, like getting your passport and things together. So I feel like it felt like you understood how to do things in business up until that point, and then it was kind of like when you built a structure about like how you do things. Do you feel like that's when you kind of learned with the Jonas Brothers and like that experience and figuring that out?
Yeah, I mean, I think that, working with them, when you're working with artists that are on that caliber, artists that are, selling platinum records, that are selling out arenas and around the world, there's a certain level of detail and a certain level of structure that you have to have. Especially for me, starting off as their assistant, I had to have answers for things. If we were going to a venue that they were going to, perform at, I had to be at the venue an hour, 2 hours earlier, just so I know, okay, where are the bathrooms at? Where's catering? All right, who are my allies at that work at the venue that if I need something, I can call on them to help, get whatever is needed quickly. So, preparation, I'm always a big fan of just prepping ahead of time, and always, prepping when no one's watching you, so that when something comes your way, you're ready for it. I think that a lot of times we often prepare after the fact or prepare too late when, there's time to be preparing. Like right now, I've taken a couple of courses, just online courses. I've read a lot of books since we've had the at-home order, so that, when this is all over and done with, I feel like I'm going to come out a smarter, more in tune person, just because the time that I'm not spending going to the office now, the time that I'm spending at home, I'm just taking time to, better myself and to learn things and to see how other people are doing things, and to just develop things that I've always wanted to develop. So, that's kind of how I feel about preparation.
Okay. So how long did you work with the Jonas Brothers?
I was with them for about 3 or 4 years, something like that.
Oh, so traveling the world. Yeah. That's pretty cool. So in the interview, was this when you started working or had the ex-girlfriend that you mentioned that you were living with, and like you had said, like she was basically a big, I would say, light in how you decided to build yourself up and like figuring yourself out as a business person. There was one thing you said in there that I really liked, and you were like, she helped me. I think I put it in my notes. Um, you were saying hustling in circles. This is what it was. You were like, some people hustle in circles, and with her, you learn to like straighten it out, to kind of play the long game in that. Can you talk about that a little bit and figuring out like, that for you not to hustle in circles?
Yeah, I think, the foundation of me being an entrepreneur and being a hustler is always there. It's been there since I was, 5, 6 years old. I was always trying new things and experimenting. But I think that, seeing how she moved and, just having conversations with her specifically about LA, the LA way of doing things and the LA way of making connections and the LA way of putting pieces together, that was something that I learned. I think that, a lot of times when it comes to connections and relationships, like for you and I, right, this is the first time that we've ever done something like this on this platform. But we met a couple of years ago, right? And there's a lot of things and a lot of value that you provide in the podcasting space. And I've always known this. I was like, Barry's somebody that I should definitely keep in touch with. And we've kept in touch over the years. Now the time is right and we're able to do something on a more formal platform. I think that, a lot of times when people, get introduced to people, when people find something new and exciting, they think that they have to hit a home run with that person or with that situation. And sometimes you got to just play the long game. It's like, okay, I'll meet Barry in 2016, 2020 we'll have a formal discussion in front of an audience. And the timing is perfect as I've been doing podcast stuff for years, but this is the first time I'm actually in the process of creating a podcast of my own where I'm going to be the voice, I'm going to be the talent. And so, it made sense for me to do something like this, to be able to talk to you, get your feedback, to be in front of your audience. I think that you just got to be patient and do things when the time is right.
Okay. To go back to when we met in 2016, can you talk about what you were doing in podcasting around that time and why you felt like you should be a podcast movement to make more connections?
Yeah, I mean, we came out with Fruit around that time, actually probably a little bit before that. And at the time that we did Fruit, I thought that it was at the time. Well, when we started Fruit, I thought that it was the only scripted podcast that had ever existed. I was a little bit naive to the fact that radio shows have been doing this since the 50s, but they just weren't popular anymore, or this type of format just wasn't popular anymore. So when we started Fruit, we were pretty much the only scripted podcast that people were talking about. And I had a lot of podcasts. For us, it was just like a gamble because it was originally a web series. And I had a lot of people who were deep in the podcast game come to us and just say, oh, Fruit's one of the best podcasts that I've heard. And after hearing that a couple of times, I'm like, oh, okay, this must be a real thing. So I think at the time I was probably just in the mindset of doubling down and making sure that I had a voice and I had a presence in the podcast space.
Okay. And so we went from starting with Fruit, and then Fruit was it 2 or 3 seasons?
We did 2 seasons, 10 episodes, I think, each, 20 episodes.
Okay. And doing that deal, was it you that structured the deals with Stitcher? Because you were behind Stitcher's premium wall, not just posting or hosting and trying to figure it out after you did kind of the before deal. Correct?
Yeah. So at the time, Stitcher, I want to say they were out, but it hadn't been out for a while. So yeah, we did do it behind the paywall. Mostly we did it for that behind the paywall because the budget was bigger for the production of the show. And when we came out with it, the first 2 to 3 weeks, that was the highest traffic that they had ever gotten on their platform. So, Fruit was a huge success at the time. And, even to this day, I still have a great relationship with Stitcher, and a lot of the executives talk to me about Fruit and, the magic that it created. And from a creative standpoint, but then also from a business standpoint, it also did very well for them.
Okay. And so how did that go into Purple Panties? Because with Purple Panties, you brought in Zane. I don't know who not to say they were no name or whatever. I'm just saying, I don't think I noticed who the writers were of Fruit. at the time, or like, like a big name outside of it being Issa Rae is presenting Fruit. But like, how did you get into when Purple Panties came out, hooking up with Zane and kind of going into a different way with the scripted drama?
Yeah, I mean, for the writing process for Fruit, Issa wrote the pilot episode because originally Fruit was supposed to be a web series, but we couldn't sell it at the time. And so because we couldn't sell it, we decided to turn it into a podcast because I actually met Chris Murrow, who's the founder of Loudspeakers Network, and he was just telling me about the podcasting space. And that's a whole other story that we should get into. But Chris is the reason why I'm in podcasting to begin with. And with Fruit, we got about, after Issa wrote the pilot episode, we had about 3 or 4 writers that wrote that. Writers that still work with us today. One of those writers is actually a writer for Insecure. Fast forward, when we did Purple Panties, we were just looking for IP to develop, and Purple Panties was something that Zane had wanted to do more things with. She was thinking about other books, she was thinking about TV, she was thinking about film. So we just turned that into a podcast. So Zane wrote most of the episodes, and then we had a small writer's room just kind of help flesh it out and make it fit for a podcast. But Zane was very instrumental in making sure that all came together.
Okay. That's kind of cool that you reuse writers throughout different projects. I guess when you find somebody talented, you keep them.
Oh yeah, that's a big part of our ethos. Like if you follow Issa Rae or anything that we do, you'll see people, the same people. Like there's people from Awkward Black Girl from 2011 that are in Insecure now in 2020. We just kind of keep it going,
Okay, and getting back to what you mentioned, how did you meet Chris Morrow? Because of course, I mean, just in case anybody doesn't know, I do work for Ellison, so he is my boss, but he really doesn't, like, if I talk shit on here, he probably just message me and say laugh out loud. But like, he's not that kind of person. But how did you meet Chris Morrow and like your interactions with him to get you to being in podcasting?
Yeah, so at the time I was working for All Def Digital, and Chris was doing a lot of work with All Def Digital, and he came in and he was just like, yeah, I'm doing a lot with podcasting. I think at the time the read was out, and I want to say Brilliant Idiots. He was doing Brilliant Idiots. And so Combat Jack show as well. And so he was just I was in a meeting. It was him and about 4 or 5 other people. And I was kind of just in the back, and he was like, yeah, this is what we're doing with podcasting. And, this is how easy it can be. And, we have a very small operation, but this is what's working for us. This is what isn't working for us. And at the time, he had mentioned Midroll and as a company that he's done a lot of work with. And for those that don't know, Midroll sells ads for podcasting. They're also the company that Stitcher is paired with as well, and Airwolf as well. So he had mentioned that he was, doing a lot of stuff with Midroll. And so just being curious, I went home that night and I just started Googling things and doing research. And I sent a cold email to Midroll and I said, hey, this is who I am. We have some ideas around some podcast concepts that we'd like to speak with you about. And, I sent it from the website. And, when you send things from a website, you kind of never know if someone's going to respond or not. And someone responded like a day later and they were like, we would love to talk to you. And it kind of called my bluff because I didn't really have anything to pitch. I was just trying to get my foot in the door. So I didn't take my own advice about preparation, but the hustler spirit in me was like, I'm just going to throw this out there. So by the time that they called us in, we just kind of felt them out, listened to what they were looking for. And we had the show Fruit. It was called a different name at the time. And we were just like, we would like to turn this show into a podcast. And so, we ended up doing the deal with them. But through that whole time, I just stayed in touch with Chris, found out what he was doing, what he was working on. And that's kind of my podcast origin story. It all started with Chris Murrow. And to see all the things that he's doing, I'm like, it was a blessing in disguise that I had a chance meeting with him, and it's inspired my career as it relates to podcasting to this day. I'm like, we're even working on stuff with the Read right now that, I'm hoping to have out within the next couple months. So, there's just been a lot of synergy with Chris Murrow and the Loudspeakers family.
I mean, to me, he's an easy person. I feel like I'm like, no matter what job I do, or even if I leave podcasting after working for LSN, I was like, Chris Marlowe has been one of the easiest people. Like, even if I want to be argumentative or something like that, he's open to having the conversation. Where some people back up, like, I don't want to do any of that. I'm like, let's do it. Like, things. And I'm like, it's really easy to have the open conversation and learn things from somebody that will like converse with you through an argument or through like frustration. And you're like, we can get to the other side of this and we can have great conversations on so many things.
Absolutely.
So he's just to me really easy on that sort of thing of like giving you the real, like you ask a question and gives you a real answer. Like, I don't even need to give you a BS type of thing. You're like, no, this is how it would work. No, this is the person you would talk to. No, that's not how I would see it, or this is the type of thing. So I've appreciated
Yeah.
it.
No, that's dope.
So as far as that's, so is it only, it's 3 podcasts and then the radio show on Apple Music, correct? So far?
So far, yeah, correct.
Okay.
Oh, I did Ball Girl Magic with Yvonne Orgy and Rosgold and Woody on Woody.
I don't think I knew that you were behind that.
Yeah, I produced that. That was with Uninterrupted. So I did that. That was a couple years ago.
I like that show. Like, I know what you're talking about. Yeah.
Yeah. I also produced and create the format for the Bella Twins, the WWE, or they're on E now. Most people know them on E. But I produced their podcast, Bella's Total Podcast, which also went to #1 when that debuted. I helped develop Lily Singh's podcast that has yet to come out, but it was a scripted fictional podcast for Lily Singh. And then also, trying to think if there was anything else. Yeah, that's it so far. And then a lot of random podcasts, like Black Widow podcast. I've helped Eric in the very, very beginning stages put that together. He's just a young hustler, who's just doing well. And there's another show called District Queen by Kia McKnight. That's a scripted podcast. I helped her put that together in the very early stages also.
So how did people reach out to you? Like, was it one of those things like how we are, or was it like a cold email, kind of how you did mid-roll? Like, let me see if you're open to it, or like, how do you usually work with people?
Yeah, it's all of the above. Like when I did the Lily Singh podcast and the Bella Twins podcast, the company that was producing it just reached out to me because they had heard about some of the work that I've done. And then, like for Akia with District Queens and for Eric with Black Widow, those are just people that I met, and they heard fruit, and because we had a personal relationship, they were like, oh, I have an idea, I'm going to try it. And so it's kind of all of the above. Like once you become known for something, people just come out the woodworks,
Okay. So have you listened to any other audio, like scripted or audio dramas outside of what you've been working on lately?
To be honest, not really. I think at one point I was listening to a show called Limelight that was scripted. I think that's what it's called. And then there was also the other one with Lawrence Tate. I listened to that one as well. I forget the name of it. I apologize. But for the most part, no. I kind of
Bronzeville. Somebody wrote it. Yeah.
Bronzeville. Yeah, exactly. I listened to that one. But yeah, I kind of, don't really listen to a lot of, like when I'm working on something very specific, I don't really follow what other people are doing because I don't want to be influenced by it. And I want my ideas to feel fresh, and I don't want to feel like, I'm taking something. So I don't really listen to podcasts. Most of the podcasts I listen to are sports and business, so mostly talking head formats or just talk show stuff. So,
a lot of people say that as far as creators, because of course we've been having the podcast IP conversation online more and more lately, but a lot of people say like that's why they ask you not to send in ideas or other things like that. Like, I'm not asking for that, or the way you pitch, we only accept this type of way because like I don't want to be influenced by something else because it's similar, or because I listened and I thought like why not bring that into my thing. So that is the thing with creators, not to like cross over.
Yeah, and it's still, scripted podcast space is still very new. I mean, this new iteration of it, especially for Black people, like there's not a lot of them. And I think that people are still trying to find how to make them. Like, I get a lot of questions to this day from companies that have a lot of money just about where do we start? How do we put together a script for a scripted podcast? How do we go about the sound design? So there's like a lot of things that I perceive as easy that I get a lot of questions about in even putting together a scripted podcast. But for me to be able to do, three or four scripted podcasts over the past couple of years, I kind of found a rhythm to how they're done. And I kind of, am able to lend that expertise when asked about it.
I kind of wonder, you might like one, and it's not like what most people have done, called Moonface, a scripted podcast. And I would say you might like that only because a creator was talking about how, I want to say it's Korean. I'm hoping I'm not getting that wrong. It's on him, like, and his mom, like, just telling a story about a guy and his mom. And he was like, I had to take out a loan to do it. And I just paid, he was just tweeting about it the other day because he was like, I just paid back the loan that it took me to do this. And I want to say it was maybe 6 or 7 episodes. So how did you, like, for all of the projects you've done, have you went into it all like, I've gotten the money to do the production, or any of them have you had to figure out, like, figuring out the budget or raising the money, like how you all have done before with different projects on YouTube and that sort of thing?
Yeah, so there's been a lot of things. I'll preface it by saying this. There's been a lot of content that I've created that I've had to put my own money up for, mostly in the video space, right? For podcasting, I've been very blessed to never have to put my own money up. I've been able to sell them from day one. Now, with that being said, there's a lot of podcasts that I've tried to pitch, never got money for, and those podcasts just didn't happen. But I will say, for all the podcasts that I've done, there's been money attached to it. And I don't want to sound spoiled because I just got lucky in that way. And I found a very niche part of content creation where there's a lot of people that are willing to put money up. But there's a lot of like video content. Like when I created the Bizz Plan, which is a video series on our YouTube channel, that was all paid for out of pocket. And there's a lot of other stuff I pay for out of pocket. But for podcasting, I've just been able to pitch it and get it sold.
Can you talk a little bit about the Bizz Plan, like what you were doing with it and what people can go back and still watch on the YouTube channel, the episodes?
Yeah, I'm sorry. Can you repeat that last part?
I was saying the Bizz Plan. Just talk about what the Bizz Plan is.
Oh, yes. So the Bizz Plan is just, I call myself like a A&R for entrepreneurs, basically just a person who kind of sees entrepreneurship in people early. So I create the series called the Bizz Plan, which basically featured a lot of people that I respected and that I thought had a lot of cool things going on. So we featured Lena Waithe, from way back in the day before she did The Shy or, anything on Netflix. We featured Issa before Insecure. We featured Jabari when he was doing a party called Surprise Party, but now he turned that into Colors and R&B only. King Batch is another person we feature. So my thing was always just finding people who were early on in their entrepreneurship journey and interviewing and getting their perspective at that time.
Okay. So I really like that. And I've listened to other things with King Bach. Is that how you say his name? I want to say it.
King Batch, yeah.
King Batch. And he's really just like, I don't think I understood how big he was on Vine and other things and what he's done.
Oh, yeah. No, he was huge on Vine. I mean, he's been huge on every platform that's since Vine. But yeah, he was, when Vine was a thing, which sounds like so long ago, he was one of the bigger creators.
Let's see here. I just want you to know that there is a thing called Black audio dramas exist, and they just want you to know there are Black audio dramas. They're just hidden. I don't know if you saw that in the comments.
Yeah, they actually tweeted me as well. I think I clicked on the link and I did check it out. So thank you for that directory and stuff like that is neat. I think curation is key to the internet, and curation is key for exposure. So, Barry, I know that you have your directory, and that's awesome. We appreciate it. And Black Audio Dramas, thank you for putting together your directory as well. It's always needed.
Yeah, I mean, I'm trying to get this job that, might be with an app that's purple, doing that sort of thing. So, we're seeing. I'm just putting it out there, like, I kind of do that thing. Y'all want somebody that does that thing.
Right. It all makes sense. I mean, you got to respect when someone's doing it like yourself independently out of the love, and you're, well tied into a community. Like, they got to respect it, or else that's not where you need to be.
Mhm. And it's just that's also like one of the people we met in 2016, like in trying to foster that relationship and keeping in touch with people from podcast movement I met back there. But I do feel like it's like finding the best podcast event for you, not even necessarily podcast movement or Third Coast, but like even smaller things. It's like if you can meet the people you want to meet. One thing I try to tell people, like, if I'm going to go to a podcast event or like any event, I've seen the people they're going to highlight or something, and there's somebody I want to meet there. And I'm like, that's all it is. It's like, even if it's that one person, and even if I'm just saying hi, I'm always about that like 1, 2, 3 type of meeting. Like, hey, you've seen me online. Now you've seen me in person one time, and I didn't like stress you about anything. And then the next time, maybe it's more of a comfortable meeting where we can, like, have more conversation. But I'm more about like any event. Like, that's how I ended up in 2016 at Podcast Movement. So poor, so broke. But I was there. And
Right, you made it.
It's really helped me in different places. That's how I met Joy Marie in person, where we got to do the Spotify thing. So just saying that to other people, that when you're looking at other things, it doesn't hurt to interact with other people, because you don't know who you're meeting at the time.
Absolutely.
I'm going to get into some of the questions that were sent over. Give me just a minute to pull it up on my screen. Was there anything that I left out up until this point that you want to talk about or wanted me to ask about?
Are you asking me, or?
Yeah, I'm asking you that. Or
no.
You can put it in the Q&A if they have.
Got you. Yeah, I think we covered a lot as far as the stuff that you've asked.
Oh, I do. While I'm doing this, what is the goal of the Apple Music show? You said it's linked to Insecure, or for like the music part of it. Is that what you're saying? Or
yeah, so we did that to basically promote the Insecure soundtrack as well as the music in Insecure. So a lot of it featured the music in Insecure, and then we also feature artists from the soundtrack. But we have more ideas and more themes that are separate from Insecure. And so the creative that we're working on right now will just basically showcase that.
Okay. Because I did see that pop up, and I was like, okay, this is cool. I like the graphics and everything with that.
Yeah, listen, tell me what you think about it.
I will do that. I was like, I think that was the thing, is that I don't think I have the understanding of what the show was for. Because I saw, like, I believe the first guest was Missy Elliott, or maybe the first or second guest. And I was like, I'm trying to figure out where this is like linking in. And then I'm the person that's a shiny object. I'll think about that. I'm like, I need to go look more into that. And then I see something else and end up, over there.
I feel it. Well, the first 2 episodes are really just Issa's musical journey. So she was just talking about the music that's influenced her from childhood all the way up until Insecure. And so she's kind of telling a chronological journey of her music tastes and music influences. It's a really good format. I think you should listen. I want to hear what you think about the format.
Okay, I'll do that. I can't think of I can look it up. For the Looking for LaToya podcast, there was a third company mentioned, at least on Apple Podcasts. Do you know what I'm talking about?
Yeah, Tenderfoot. Yeah, so Tenderfoot is our production partner for the show. Tenderfoot has done just a lot of dope podcasts. I'm forgetting names, like it's called Murder in Atlanta, I believe. Let me look it up right now so I don't butcher.
Okay.
So Tenderfoot did Radio Rental, To Live and Die in LA. It's a good fit to have them involved when we were putting together the.
With them knowing how to understand.
Yeah.
Give me just a moment. The spreadsheet's still pulling up. I looked at that. You see the person the things that I look at. I was like, okay, what's that third company? We got HBO, we got radio.
Yeah.
Okay.
Which was that was a thing, like the naming and like making sure that everybody's name was on there was a huge thing. So it's funny that you mentioned that, because at first there wasn't a lot of room. HBO was like, oh, we should just have our name on there, obviously, because they paid for it. But yeah.
And I didn't ask, and I'll ask this. And you can tell me if we didn't. you didn't say I couldn't ask you anything. For the podcast IP, because I'm not sure if you've seen that there's been podcast IP conversations going on. Like the Nod with Gimlet was has been talking about how they don't own anything of the show with the Nod and things like that. Another round is figuring out how to get their archive from BuzzFeed if they're going to give it up, even though they got, they could continue with it and do things with it. Like the archive is where their money is right now. Do you all, like, I guess the company Issa Rae or whatever, own IP of the podcast you've done, or does that go to the companies that you've created it with? Or like, was that a question in how you all were creating it?
Oh, it's always a question. That's the first question.
Okay, I was asking.
Yeah, no, I mean, anytime we create anything, there's always a discussion had, whether we get it or not. That's a whole other thing, but there's always a discussion. Yeah, I saw what Eric and Brittany, the Twitter situation that was going on. And it's funny because I remember talking to Brittany when they were starting the Nod way back when. And so that's interesting. And then even, Tracy and Heaven with another round, I completely understand. I would say that for us, it's been a mix. Obviously for Looking for LaToya, that is HBO's IP. So any derivatives or anything that spawns out of that is theirs. For like when we did our deal with Stitcher, basically Stitcher owned all of the audio, but any derivatives, we can do what we want with it because their stance is they're a podcast platform, so they don't care about anything else. So if we wanted to turn fruit into a TV show, if we wanted to create fruit merchandise, we were able to do that. And the other shows that I did, I was just brought on as a producer. So it was owned by the company that was financing it. I'm not sure what they worked out with the host, but for the stuff that I've done, that I've been a part of, that I've created, it's kind of been 50-50. Some of it we own, some of it we own with stipulation, some of it we don't own. It's kind of a mixed bag.
Okay. Well, I mean, to me, like how we're having these conversations in 2020, and I feel like when this was bubbling up again, and to me, this really started bubbling up with the Call Her Daddy type of thing and what they were dealing with. I was like, I mean, because I pay attention to the history of things, of like with podcasting, I'm like, if you're paying attention, you've seen this happen like a few different times with different people, and it's like top people around them have better conversations around it. And like so far, it's just been little bubbles if you were paying attention. And now finally, we're having huge conversations so people can understand what podcast IP is. Because like I was talking about it on Instagram and somebody hit me up like, that's what I was telling, people to have their LLC. And I was saying, I'm not even saying that. Like I'm saying there's something way bigger than that. Like there's, things a whole around the podcast. I'm like, but if you're looking, I'm a big person right now. I'm reading the deals that production agencies are doing, and everything is big on like talking about who's going to get the TV rights, who's getting movie rights, who's going to be able to do this, and who's getting merch, like everything is put in there. And I'm like, there's a point to that, and they know what they're doing. And if you don't know what you're doing, you're just celebrating it later on. You're like, so that person's making how much money and I'm making what? And like we're having this conversation. So overall, I'm glad you all have always had those conversations, because I feel like as far as Black creators, sometimes it's like you're in the know enough to know things, and sometimes you're learning, like hitting your head with every project, you're learning something new about what you should have learned before, type of thing.
No, it's the wild, wild west. I mean, quite frankly, the only reason why we're having this discussion in podcasting is because of the newness of it. And with our generation, we are used to owning things, and we're used to not giving up everything. Whereas, in previous generations, they're like, oh, you're going to give me money for it? Take it. Like, for instance, that's why the TV and film space is the way that it is. There's no way on this green earth that I can go to HBO and sell them a TV show and say, oh yeah, by the way, I'm going to own it. HBO's going to look at me and laugh. Like, that's just a fact. We see that with record deals. Now there's new companies that are popping up, independent distribution companies, where they're giving artists ownership in the music that they create. But traditionally, with a record deal, they give you money, you give them an album, they own that album. And that's just the old school way of thinking. With podcasts, because it's the Wild Wild West, because we're setting the rules as we're going, you're able to say, oh, wait, I've seen this happen in the TV and film space. I've seen this happen in the music space. I don't want this to happen in the podcast space. So we're requesting that we have ownership now. So like you said, there's a conversation around IP ownership, and then there's a question around derivatives and what can be created outside of that and who has access to that. A couple of years ago, you can do a podcast deal, and a company will give you all the rights outside of the audio, and they didn't care because they were like, we're a podcast company. Now you have podcast companies partnering with TV production companies, and the whole goal is to create a pipeline to create something. Like, for instance, I always use the example, if I wanted to create a show about going to the moon, it's incredibly hard to get the budget for it. It's incredibly hard to, get a studio to sign off on it. But I can create that in the podcast space. So if I create that in the podcast space and it becomes a hit, and I can sell the vision of, hear how great this sounds audio-wise, hear how great the story is, hear how great the sound design is, then I can go and take that and I can make a movie out of that, or I can make a film out of that. And it's less risk for everybody. We produced a podcast for cheap. Now that we see that there's an audience and that there's a lane for it, now we could put some real money behind it to make it bigger. So I think the ownership conversation is really interesting, and I'm glad that, people are asking for things. I think that it's going to be, it's a little difficult to ask for things retroactively in that regard. It's not impossible, but I can understand. I'm with the creators, and I want Brittany and Eric to get their ownership. I want Tracy and Heaven to get their ownership. But I can also understand why Gimlet and why BuzzFeed are taking a stance that they take.
It's more with the conversation with another round. I'm very big on that because I want them to have it, because they actually came up in a time where they just added dynamic ad insertion, DAI, when BuzzFeed started with Acast. And that's the reason I even learned about that. And I was like, that's something not even understanding at that time and already being signed to something. And then they attach something to it where they're like, oh yeah, and I can now make money on your old episodes. Where before we were only having a conversation about the episodes we're making and the ads on episodes we're making, things like that. Now we're having a conversation on the last 70 episodes and refreshing ads and making money on that. And I'm like, to me, I feel like because they were in the middle of all that, I'm like, that's a real gray area, because you weren't, when you signed up for things, nobody knew you were signing up for you also making money on my archive and never giving me money that you're making off the archive too. We could talk about this episode, but you didn't tell me we were talking about the episodes for forever,
Absolutely.
and ever.
No,
so.
That's a great point. I mean, and let's not talk about the feed as well. They're taking, if you have a show like Another Round and you kind of say, okay, we know what that audience is. We know what that audience is looking for. Now let's go create another show that kind of fits that audience, and let's put that on the feed for Another Round. The feed is really one of the more important things, I would say, probably top two. Because you can start now, that company, you can be long gone as a podcast host, have nothing to do with that company, and the feed that you help them build can now be, populated with other shows. So I think that's also a conversation worth having.
Yeah, it's a way bigger conversation. So I'm glad we're having it, and I hope it makes more people sit back and just think about the conversations you might have before wanting to join a network. Because a lot of the time, because I work for LSN, I see a lot of messages about how do I get on and things like that, and I'm like, that's not even the start of the conversation. The start of the conversation isn't how do you get on? It's more what would you have to give up? And are you prepared to give those things up? And I don't think a lot of people are thinking about that when they're talking about, I want to be on a network. If anything, I'm thinking that means you're giving up a lot of things for a name, when I might just want to be a guest on a few of the podcasts, and hopefully some of their audience can come over to my audience.
Yeah.
I think about things.
I mean, I see that all the time in the music space, with our label. There's a lot of artists that come to us and say, oh, I want to sign with you guys. I need to sign with you. And the first thing I always think about in the back of my head, I'm like, do you know what that means? Do you know what you want to, do you want to sign because it sounds cool? Because there's a lot of things, we try to be as fair as possible with our deals, but there's a lot of things in signing a record deal that, an artist may not agree with. So, I think it's a fun thing to say. How could I be on in the podcast space? How could I get signed to you in the record label space? But it gets deep and it gets very nuanced. And I think, people just have to be, and there's no right or wrong answer. You don't get a Justin Bieber, you don't get a Beyonce, you don't get, I don't know, Mariah Carey without a record label, without a big company behind it. Some may argue that, I know for a fact that the Read is due, like, not their success, but the reason why the show has happened was because of Loudspeakers and Chris Morrow. Chris came to them and said, I want to put together a show with Kid Fury. And Kid Fury said, the only way I'll do it is if I can do it with my friend. And that's when he brought in Crystal. Like, had Loudspeakers not come to them, we may never have had the Read. You know what I'm saying? So I think that, there's pros and cons to all of it. And I think you just have to know what game you want to play and go with it.
That is so real. So I'm going to ask some questions from other people. I like this one. I guess their question is, how do you effectively market a podcast? And I would kind of change that to say, how has, for the podcast you've had, what podcast has been effective in marketing? I think would be a better thing for you.
That's honestly a question for you. I can give my novice 2 cents on marketing a podcast. I think one thing that we did specifically with Fruit that I still, I think worked and was valuable, because we knew that it was going to be audio, we wanted to make every visual that you saw with Fruit, like, very bright and very, like, visually appealing, right? So if you look at the cover art for Fruit, we use a very bright background, and then you have a guy with a 6-pack and he's covering his face, because that's part of the story that we're telling. Is this character X, who you don't really know who he is. He's kind of working anonymously but telling you his story. So we use that in the cover art. We created videos around that where you have his voice. We used actually 2 actors where you see their mouth and you see parts of their body, but you don't get a chance to see their full face. But that was all. We used very bright backgrounds. We used very appealing images, so I think that was one thing that I found to work, just making sure that the cover art and the video content around it was dynamic. But other than that, I'm not going to pretend to be an expert in marketing podcasts, because I don't think that I've been a part of a podcast yet that I felt 100% happy with all of the marketing efforts.
To back up on that, what was it that you did, like, after we had the conversation where I was like, this could have been pushed a little bit more? What was it that you did after that you were like, let's do a little bit more with this?
What's a series that I did afterwards?
No, I'm saying, like, for looking for LaToya, because it felt like I saw more marketing, like, after we talked, or I guess after it was released. So what were some of the things that you all did to push it further?
Yeah, so we did like audiograms around it, where we just took the image and put audio behind it. That was for social media. What else did we do? I don't think that we marketed on other podcasts because of the timing of everything. We were like, it was kind of a rush to get it out. Like, we put Looking for LaToya out basically from writing the first episode to getting it out. That was about 3 weeks, a 3-week process. So we just didn't have a lot of time to do it. But and talking to Tenderfoot, we were talking about more episodes that we're going to do. They're like, we just need to make sure that we're 2 or 3 months ahead of it, so we can go to Spotify, we can go to Apple, we can say, hey, here's a show that we're coming out with, and we can get support, whether it be banner support from them, whether it be putting together a plan to advertise on other podcasts. Because I think that the number one mistake people make when it comes to podcasts is just trying to go to a general market. I think the best way to build a podcast audience is to go to the podcast audience. A lot of people kind of negate the podcast audience, and I think it's very valuable to just advertise on other podcasts. So I would say, advertising on other podcasts, being able to partner with the platforms in a more meaningful way, I think would be great. And then figuring out ways to create ancillary content, like whether it be video content, whether it be Twitter discussions. I think that's probably the 3 things I would have liked to have done.
Okay. And it seems like you all are good at press releases. At least I felt like I saw more articles being written about Looking for LaToya over the week after it was released.
Yeah, that was just, people picking up on it. We did go after a couple of outlets, like we did an exclusive of Rolling Stone. But after that, it was just a lot of people just picking it up and placing it.
Okay. Let's see here for other questions. How long does it? That's more, I would say, for this. Let's see. Give me a small moment. That's probably for me. I'll answer these things. This is, I feel like you kind of covered this. It said, how do you reach out to sponsors? Like, can you email Cash App and ask them like to sponsor you or like to be a part of the things? I feel like you kind of said this when you said you reached out to mid-roll, but like, have you done that with other companies where you've kind of cold reached out or like, just hit up people like, is this something you're open to?
For sponsors, I haven't done it personally because I'm mostly working with companies that have teams that do that. And what I found is that a lot of these podcast companies, they already have the relationships and they're talking to brands and sponsors every day. It's just a matter of them putting something in front of the brands that the brands are interested in. So that's it. I mean, and the other thing is, with podcasting, you can sell ads on it ahead of time, which is cool. So like for Fruit, we got MailChimp involved before we even had the first season written. We just kind of gave them the idea, the concept behind it, and they said, okay, we're down to sponsor your first season. So some of the ads can come way in the beginning, and then some can come just with success.
Okay. And when they said before, like, did they say like we would hope you reach a certain number or anything when you talked to them before? Or they were just like, we'll see what happens with this?
The sales team gave them projections. But at the end of the day, it was just a hope. The only requirement on our end is we had to mention MailChimp 3 times. I think was the rule. And, they kind of gave us guidelines of how they wanted to be featured and things like that. But other than that, it was all up to us.
This is a question. What did you learn from making your first podcast with Fruit that carried you on to make future podcasts?
I learned that there's a tremendous need for this type of podcast and people want it. And so, just got to keep creating it.
There was said, how do you care about keeping people engaged in between seasons of a podcast? Is that something like you're looking into, or do you just think about it like you're gearing up for the next season?
I do care. Unfortunately, just with bandwidth and things like that, we haven't been able to engage people, in the middle of seasons, but that is something in a perfect world. If I had all the time in the world and had the team to do it, then yes, that is a thing.
Okay, and then I'm going to answer a question in a Q&A on Zoom. It is in all your pitching for podcasts, what would you say is the key thing to mention in your decks?
I would say probably the main key thing is to really show why this story is important today. It's kind of age-old thing of pitching content. Why is this story important today? And why are you the person to tell that story? If you can sell that vision, I think you'll have a high rate of success. And then obviously there's little cheat things you can do, like having notable talent attached to it, having a big social media following and things like that. But, the number one rule in pitching content is, why is this story important today? And why are you the one to tell the story? So are you connected to that world that you're pitching? And what type of relevancy does that world have today or in general?
That's a good thing. And I wanted to point out, like, there's an audio drama called Centered. B. Andrea's in here, and she did it, and Jerica was attached, and she was on Grey's Anatomy at one point. And like that was almost like the thing that pulled me in when she like said that. And I'm like, I would love to hear her voice on an audio drama. So I feel like even if you're in a pitching that, or even if you're marketing something and you have a name attached in that kind of way, of thinking about like, including that or like showing those kind of things can bring in more
Yeah.
people.
Yeah, and one thing about when you're pitching, like if you can say that you have notable talent attached to it, that the show can be crap 90% of the times. Like these networks are going to be like, oh yeah, we'll do it. So it's one way to get it.
Okay, let's see. We have another question from Dr. Joy. This one's from Dr. Joy. What are your thoughts about what happens in the podcast landscape in the next 3 to 5 years?
Oh, by the way, I'm not saying that the last show was crap. I'm just saying that people are small-minded that you're pitching to, and if you can bring them a notable talent, that's just the way to get things. So just want to throw that out there. But yeah, the podcast landscape in the next 3 to 5 years, I think it's going to be incredibly important. I think that you're going to see more and more podcasts be created, more new concepts. I think that you're going to see a lot more money in the space. Look at the move that Sirius just did with Stitcher. I'm watching Spotify really, they're going after a lot of people between Michelle Obama and Kim Kardashian and Joe Rogan. So I think that a lot of companies are starting to position themselves as because, podcasting used to be like a throwaway. It used to be like, oh, and we could do a podcast, but yeah, maybe not. But now podcasting is becoming a thing of like, oh no, it's something that we should do and something that we should consider because it's cheap to produce and you can get it done fairly quickly. I think that we're just going to see a huge expansion, and now is the time to kind of really carve out your lane in the podcast space, whether it be as a person in a podcast space on the business side, as a producer, even like if you're a line producer, you do TV and film, like, honing your skills in a podcast space, or if you're a talent who has a unique POV or a unique voice, I think now's the time to really stake your claim.
And I do want to mention in the FAQ on my site, podcastingcolor.com, I did just include on the bottom, there's a fiction podcast. I can't think of the name now, but you'll see it, that included their like whole production budget for one of their seasons, for anybody that's kind of looking or doing that kind of thing and want to see what someone else has done. That's in the FAQ on my site, because I feel like it's easy. I'm one of those people that kind of wants somebody else to like see how somebody else did it, or like, how does that work for somebody else so I can work within that. That's to me easier than just like figuring out as I go and failing, a lot to kind of like have a place to start on that. We're almost done. I'm going to look and see if there's any other questions in the Excel sheet, and you all can put them in the Q&A here if you have them. This was so good to me as a conversation. Thank you for answering these questions, because I feel like a lot of people are looking for what a Black person in the audio drama space is saying. Oh, I think I saw something in a chat about like, how do you get more eyes, or like, what are you thinking about like trying to get more eyes on Black audio dramas, or like on the space? Because as you said, it's like such an open space and people aren't really sure where to look or things like that. Are there any things like, because it's a fiction podcast, you're like, these are the places I would look, or like, this is the crowd of people, or anything like that?
I haven't nailed down like a place that I look per se. I kind of have approached it like on a one-by-one basis. And so I don't have any specific advice on that, but I do think, places like, your website, the Black Audio Dramas website, I think those are great places, because if we can provide more exposure to those types of platforms and say, hey, if you go to this place, you're going to be able to get the latest and greatest in the podcasting space from people of color, audio dramas, etc. I think that's incredibly important. So we just need more resources like that. And then I think it's upon the rest of us to collectively push those things.
And I can say, I mean, this is the kind of thing, like, say you have your stuff together and, there was a new podcast coming out that Issa Rae Productions is working on. And he was like, you know what? He just said he tries to advertise another podcast. So, if you had your stuff together and you were like, just so you know, when you're ready, I'm ready. I'm just saying.
Yeah. Exactly. Yeah, for sure.
You're thinking about this. I'm always just trying to like bring the idea to people. Some people feel like they have to be invited in the room, or like somebody has to email them like, I want you. And it's like, but what if you email them like, hey, I know you probably gonna look for me, so I'm gonna just put this email here for when you're ready to look for me.
Exactly.
And you never know when that will turn into something more. This conversation will be saved. I will be putting it on Facebook, and I'll send out the YouTube link on Monday. I'll probably just edit the start of this. But I'll send out the YouTube link on Monday to anybody who RSVP. Type of thing. I guess just so you all know in the chat, if you want to share links to your podcast for other people in here, you can do that. I feel like that's how you can find new things to listen to pretty easily. Just trying a new podcast, especially audio dramas. I feel like they're easy to get lost into. I can work a little bit easier. It's like somebody's talking, but they're not talking to me. So
right, of course.
I'm working that. And I do, if you all are on Spotify, have an audio drama playlist where the first episode of a few different audio dramas that are POC. That if you're just trying to find a different one, those are there. Because there's a few different things. There's Harlem Queen. Like I saw that on ABC or something the other night. Like they were doing a thing and they had included them in the show, an audio drama. I want to say out of Chicago they are. But there's a lot of different things going on right now. It's just people getting the eyes on it. And that's what I'm really like noticing, getting the eyes on it, showing it's good. Like who can you get to write up about it and that sort of thing. So it's all a space. It's all a game and trying to play it.
Yeah, there's a lot of ways to do it. So, you're doing great work. Everyone that showed up today is, doing great work, and you just got to keep going at it.
Okay, well, thank you. I think that the companies you're working with might be doing this, but they said, how important is it for creatives to trademark their name? But maybe you can talk about that like with the Bizz Plan, because you have done other things that's your own. So how do you feel about trademarking and how important is that?
Yeah, you should definitely own as much as you can. I would say, if that's, if you're using your name and you're selling things around your name, 100% you should think about that.
So, owning yourself. I feel like most people are getting into the conversation, but if you look, there's always going to be people that have talked about it, or, if you look for podcasts, I'm always big about Castbox as a podcast app. If you search in there, they're really good at Castbox. I feel like they're the best podcast app search for like people's names. If you search a subject and things like that, it's just easier to find things you're looking for a conversation on. So if you're looking for more conversations, if you put in Benoni's name, you'll see more of his conversations and things like that. So I find that if you're looking for more trademarking conversation, podcast IP and things like that, if you go somewhere that has a good search, you'll find people really having those detailed conversations that can give you what you're looking for.
What's the name of the site called?
For what?
You said Castbox?
Oh yeah, Castbox. Castbox. It's an app.
Okay.
But they do have a web page also. But yeah, they have the best search. Like that's when I tell people I pull my slight stalkerish thing to see if people have done other interviews. That's the only one I see that pulls all the interviews that person has done, and not just like by podcast that app likes or whatever. So yeah.
Got you.
I find that I can find things from like 2016 where I'm like, give me the interviews when people didn't care. Show me what was going on there.
Absolutely. Facts.
I think that we answered all the Q&A. Yep, we're good to go. So was there anything else? I think we mentioned all your projects, and I'll link to those in the email I send on Monday. And if you release something new, you're talking about yours, I'll send that to the people that RSVP'd for this also. But I think that's all. Thank you all for coming.
Thanks, Barry. Thanks, everyone. I appreciate you all.
All right. Talk to you later.
Bye.
Bye. Good.